Hello, everybody. I'm Matt Anderson, and welcome to The Road Not Taken, how ordinary people got out of their own way, and you can too. I'm delighted to introduce our guest today. His name is Brent Robertson, hails from the northeast of the United States, and Brent works with leaders to design futures worth believing in. So the company's line, a partner at Fathom, he champions an approach to strategic planning, leadership development, talent engagement, and market differentiation that prioritizes people and relationships. As a result, his clients don't simply plan their futures, they bring them to life through the energy of organization-wide involvement in and commitment to generating valuable businesses that matter. So obviously we'll be talking in more detail about that. In addition to his client work, Brent is an outspoken advocate for the region that he lives in the Northeast US, and serves as an advisor to community and business organizations who endeavor to create a better future for everyone who lives here. With a bias toward provoking new ways of seeing the world and taking action to change it, Brent is a sought-after keynote speaker and is regularly featured in regional and national publications. He has oriented his life around helping people create conditions for their success, is frequently invited to lecture on the topic of leadership, and uses his personal transformational experience, going from overweight and out of shape middle-ager to ultra-distance athlete in under 3 years, I need to learn about this, as a place from which to mentor others through personal and professional change. Brent, thank you so much for joining us.
Matt, thank you. It's a pleasure.
Yeah, no, it's great. So my kickoff question is, if this relates to your weight loss running story, but if you had to pick one thing that's most helped you overcome adversity, what would you say that is?
Well, it's a great question. It's funny what happens when you experience sort of a breakthrough in your life. A whole lot of things begin to make sense. And I think for me, what was one of the biggest catalysts was I met a gentleman, I want to say 12 years ago. And that moment sort of introduced me to this world that I sensed existed, but wasn't quite sure. And sort of in that very moment, found that a whole lot of things about me made a lot of sense based on the fact that there was this whole other place to work and play that I didn't know existed. And so, that situation sort of woke me up around two things. One, the moment in which I really decided to do something about taking on my next chapter of my life, but also what was the catalyst for it. And, your question was what is the thing? And it was the listening, and what someone showed up with as a result of the listening made available in the conversation.
I need a bit more on that one. So listening in terms of presence, or So, and what was the experience? Was it where you felt properly heard, or where someone taught you the skill or something?
Yeah. No, I think that was exactly it. It was, here's a way to look at it is if you're listening, you are someone's calling. So depending on what kind of listening you're making available to someone, that listening might draw out something in them that they've never explored. It might open up opportunity or territory that they hadn't been able to explore without the listening there for them to be heard and recognized in what they were about to share. And I met someone who had the extraordinary ability to, just through the listening, open up territory for me to explore and to recognize what I was actually up to that I didn't know at the time. That sort of precipitated a huge breakthrough.
So what were you talking about?
Well, it's funny. Like I've always struggled. Part of Fathom's history, part of my background is building this very successful marketing company, which that's what Fathom was born as. And that was 15 years ago. And we were doing really well, sort of fitting into the description of what you think of as a marketing firm. And I noticed that the more we got successful, the absolutely more dissatisfied I became. What the heck was that about? And it was sort of this dissatisfaction with the status quo. Like we could continue building a business that was really predicated on the idea that we existed to compel people to consume things maybe they didn't need, to put a shiny face on an organization without really doing the work to make sure that it could live up to it. When you think about on the face of advertising and marketing, 15 years ago. And that was incredibly dissatisfying when you think about, is that what I want to be about? And not that it's always about that, but I can't tell you how many client engagements when you're in that business and it's growing and you're trying to support revenue and you're trying to support payroll, how many times you have to hold your nose to take on a client relationship when you know what they're up to isn't authentic, and you have to be there to make it look good and sound good anyway, right? Or they're unwilling to deal with what needs to be dealt with. So anyway, it was at that moment, so it was that and a bunch of other things that were going on in my life that just had me say, well, wait a minute, is this the only game possible? And it was sort of at that moment when I met, his name is Mel Toomey, and became a mentor of mine, that he and I met, that he opened up this whole other realm of possibility for me, which was creating the future. And that's really what led to what Fathom has become, which is, look, be unsatisfied with what is, create conditions that are going to invite what you want. And that changed the genesis of my life. It changed the genesis of Fathom and everything else too.
So are you saying then that through talking to him, the incongruence of the work you were doing started to hit home or got spoken out loud?
Yeah. Well, I found myself, here's for anyone that can empathize with this one, the symptoms start to show up based on your level of cynicism. So if you notice your level of cynicism is starting to increase, you're probably on the verge of two choices. One, breakthrough, meaning you're dissatisfied enough to actually do something about it, or two, to be a career cynic. And there's, of course, a role for you too. You can go on Facebook and be fulfilled being a cynic and not taking any action. So, and I think that's really the fundamental thing, is if you start to sense a new level of cynicism, if you're finding it harder to find connection to meaning of what you're doing, that's the moment before it gets dangerous, before you start showing up and pissing people off. It's really a special moment to say, who should I speak to that could open up a door for me to understand what's going on that has me cynical about the way things are? Because what that means is you're up to something that the current world is inadequate in helping you with, or inadequate in responding to. So maybe it's starting to point to, maybe there's something that needs to exist that doesn't yet exist based on what your aspirations are. Okay.
And you might have lost me a little bit. So you're saying that moving forward after that, whenever you'd felt, I'll use the word frustrating, but the cynicism increasing, you're saying that's when you reach out to somebody that will be the right audience so you can think it through out loud to create something better. Is that what you're talking about?
I'm just saying that it's a target or a symptom that if you do notice in yourself, it's a good calling out to say, I'm reacting to the world and being cynical about the way it is reacting in a way that's not going to make any difference. What if I could thoughtfully respond? The only way I find to be able to do that is to speak with another, to really suss out, well, what's behind me being, pissed off about the way the world is, that I could actually make sense of and do something about. And it was sort of at that moment when it's sort of all of these planets aligned around how sort of I was ready to surrender things I believed in service to having to think I had needed to fit in with a life that I had. It was in that moment that I met my mentor that opened up a whole world of opportunity for me. And I've seen that pattern happen over and over and over again, not just for me, but for others.
And that comes best through having the right person to talk to. Is that what you're saying?
Yeah.
Process things with. Hence the work that you do in terms of helping companies create, I suppose, a bigger and more exciting future. And I know it's much more eloquent than that what you do. But before we get to that, how did you then change the companies that you pursued? Because it sounds like there were companies you had that you had ethical issues with, or at minimum mixed feelings about. So how did you shift that part in terms of who you then worked with from a marketing standpoint?
Yeah, so the way it played out was interesting. We simply couldn't do our work without having some sort of big and fundamental questions answered by our clients. And what we found, like, why are you doing this? In service to what is this about? Like, what's the good or greater good in this? Yeah, we understand profitability and margins. Yeah, we got that. But what else? What else is part of the story that makes it worth putting this effort in? What is it that it's going to bring to someone if they get access to this service or this product or, whatever it might be? And what we found is our clients really struggled to answer those questions. So what we would do, because we had to, is we really helped them figure out the answers to those questions. And we would do it for free so that we could get ourselves to the answers we needed to be able to do our work that we could be proud of and stand behind. But something interesting happened is once we helped an organization find answers to those questions, fundamental questions about why they exist, fundamental questions about in service to what do they want to be about, what world are they trying to create somehow that goes beyond just the products they sell. Once they had answers to those questions, it changed everything inside of their organization. It started to shift their culture. It started to shift how they thought. It started to shift their behavior. And we saw that consistently enough that about 5 years ago, we took on a handful of clients to really test these ideas out, to say, hey, what if we focused our attention fully on getting answers to those questions and then putting them at the center of an organization's design? And about 2 years after we started that process, we brought in a third party to audit those organizations. And in every case, they were performing beyond any historic benchmark or benchmark that their competitors were performing against in that period of time. And that's when we knew we were onto something, and that's what really formed where we are today. But yeah, that's how the process, it was messy because, we literally dismantled an organization in flight to regenerate as something else. And in retrospect, it would have been easier just to kill one off and start a new one.
Yeah. So who did you need to persuade to get onto your side? Because it sounds like you were the one that talked to Mel, but then who else in your company needed to come over to your side to be in agreement with how you wanted to approach things moving forward 12 years ago?
Yeah. And that was a real struggle, was to, in it, I learned a really important lesson. In that time, what you're talking about, in the early stages of, hey, there's something else possible for us. We should go there. What I did is I walked the path myself. I climbed up to the top of the mountain that I saw we could climb, and I stood on top of that mountain and I waved my flag as big as I could, as boldly as I could. And I spent a lot of time getting really upset with, why aren't other people coming to this mountaintop with me? Like, what's going on? And I started to think, here's where the cynicism shows up, right? Here's another way it shows up is my team inadequate? Like, or what's wrong with me? Or maybe this is crazy. Maybe what I'm seeing isn't possible. And you start to go down this delusional path of arguing yourself out of, what's wrong in whatever way that has it be that this isn't tracking. And then something happened, which is, I learned a really important lesson, which is go back and meet your team where they are. Walk the path together. The path ended up being different than I expected it to be, but we walked it together, and the expression of the work we were doing was amplified by the human beings that were with me on the path together. And once I realized that, boy, we all struggle to put our energy into places that have the greatest effect. I put everything I had into waving that flag, and it made no difference except to piss me off and everyone else off around me. It distanced me from everyone. And it distanced me from myself. It was only when I went back and spent time, where's everyone? And how do we walk forward together? Which is, it seems much harder at the start. It's the only way. There's the proverb I'm sure many have heard of, which is, you want to move fast, move alone. If you want to go long, go with others. Yeah. And, in dealing with organizations, that was key.
I understand what you said, that it sounds like initially you were, at first I thought you were going to say you kind of modeled it for everybody else, and then they followed suit because it was such a good path that they saw. And clearly that wasn't the case. I'm just curious how you got people to, or how you approach people so that they, weren't cynical about you given what they'd seen prior to that. It almost sounds like someone like it's on a new diet, or someone's just raving about a new fill in the blank, and they were sort of evangelizing about it for a while, and people, but it's sort of annoying everybody else. And it sounds like that's what was going on, but you approached it differently and succeeded. I'm curious what kinds of things you did to make that work.
Yeah. And that's it's a great question, because it points to the key to all this, is that the work that I was imagining we're up to was future, and future only lives in experience, in language. Meaning, if you want someone to really understand what you're talking about, they need to experience it. And so when I finally got off the mountaintop and it stopped talking about what it was like, what I did is I created opportunities for my team and my clients to step in and have the experiences directly. Best way to put it is, how many books on learning to swim do you need to read before you're ready to swim? You could read 1,000. It's not going to make any difference until you get in the water. You got to get in the water. And so that's what it became about, is how do I take what I've learned, and then how do I create a condition in which somebody else can have the experience, and then they can speak to it as clearly as I can. There's a great phrase, right? Vision without language is a hallucination.
And then in terms of the work that you started to do, I wrote down the word clarity of purpose is what it sounded to me like you were helping companies define. How accurate is that? And if it's not exactly what you're talking about, then can you sort of explain what else is part of that shift and focus that you made?
Sure. The best way to explain it really is to talk about sort of there's multiple dimensions that if we can get access to as we think about our lives individually, or our lives as a family or as an organization, start to change the game for us. So, the reality that we're in any given day, right? The appointments you need to go to, the emails you need to respond to, the phone calls, the grocery list, whatever it might be. It's so tangible. And in this day and age, it's so overwhelming, right? The channels in which you can be reached for demands on your time, the choices you have to consume your time, the expectations of how much someone needs to get done in any given day, and everything that led up to that, right? All the things you've caused that have you be as busy as you are. That reality can be so consuming that we tend to forget there's another reality, or we get fleeting glimpses of it from time to time, but then we forget how to get access to it, because all of our time is consumed by simply reacting to what the world throws at us, because we've created a world that can throw a lot at us. So that's one end of it. The other side is, if we had access to a very clear and a very powerful articulation of the future that we want, not a future that's described as, I just want more of the past, but a future where you're declaring a different possibility. You're literally using language to call into existence a different possibility for your future. Now, all of a sudden, if you can keep that future in your mind as you're going through your day-to-day, then anything you would need to do during your day to get through that day, phone calls you're making, emails you're responding to, you can consider the future you want while you're designing your actions. So let's just say, you've got an email that shows up with an urgent deadline on it. And of course you would just respond to get that thing addressed. But what if whomever it is you were responding to was critical to your future, and you needed them to see you in a different way, or you needed to invite them to get access to you in a different way, and you knew that was going to need to be true about your future? You could then proactively design your action with your future in mind. So let's just say that's true. I've got a clear sense of my reality, and I know the demands on my time. I have a clear and powerful sense of the future that I want. Now I have choices in how I design my actions being what I say and what I do to create the future that I want. The future can't be created directly, can only be created indirectly. The future is the consequence of conditions existing. So I can design my actions to create certain conditions. So let's just say someone listening to this is in a business where that's fairly transactional. Let's say you're an accountant, and in the past you're known as someone who's there to sort of be the financial storyteller of the past, and your business is becoming commoditized because what you do is transactional. It's formulaic. I can rely on technology for this. If I want to start to be seen differently by my clients, more than just a financial storyteller of the past, then I need to change the questions I ask. I need to change the way I'm showing up to that client. What if I started asking them more about their future? Mm-hmm. What if I started asking them about what do they hope to accomplish? What do they dream about? And I start providing them with clues as to how to proactively set themselves up for financial success in the future, not just make sure that they can be filling out a tax return in a compliant way. Now I might shift how I'm seen. So that's what I mean. That's an example of what I mean. If I have access to both of these things, I can make those choices. Now, here's the tricky part. That future vision, your reality will eat it for lunch any chance it gets. Right. The world is able to produce so many excuses and reasons why future didn't get done, mm-hmm. that you need something extraordinary to keep that future open. So that future dimension is something like, the minute you stop giving it voice and you stop giving it energy, it collapses under the weight of the demands of your day.
Sure.
It doesn't exist without you. Mm-hmm. Your reality exists without you having to put a lot of energy there to create it, right? Mm-hmm. It takes a lot of energy to deliver on your reality, but it doesn't take a lot of energy to create it. So there's this third thing, and this is getting to the answer to your question, which is, what is a reason so compelling that I simply have to continue to pursue it? And because that reason for my future is so powerful that it keeps my future open no matter what the world throws at me. No matter how busy I get, sure. There's a reason my future needs to exist that haunts me. Literally, I can't let it go. My friend Barry Svigals and I talk about it as a sense of purpose that puts you in a position where life is this experience that you would describe as joyful desperation. On one hand, I experience the joy of life because I'm in pursuit of something bigger than me. And on the other hand, I'm desperate in my pursuit of that thing because it's bigger than me.
Okay, let me stop. So how do you get a business, or let's say whatever, a business owner or board to get authentic enough to get to that point? Because that's, for many people, they need to get very open and personal and vulnerable to be able to have that kind of outcome, I think, and also quite a bit of thought. So what can you share about the process you go through there to get people to be that open so that it's truly compelling enough that it does stay top of mind? Yeah.
Well, so the navigating our reality in business in particular, or as a professional, has a lot to do with how much we know. I know how to do this. I have skills here. I'm an expert. Knowledge, history, all those kinds of things. So let's just say that dimension of reality is really the dimension of knowledge. I've seen this problem before and I know how to fix it. I've been up against that before. So that's one thing, is to realize that what is it we know about our current reality? If we don't get that established, literally written out in language, what is my reality? What if I were to describe right now the characteristics of my reality? What would I say about it? We've got to get that listed out, because if we don't understand the lens in which we look at the world, how the heck are we going to create a new lens to look at the world? Okay. So that's the first act, and it sounds so simple, mm-hmm. but think about it. When was the last time you felt like you had on a sheet of paper a clear understanding of what's true for you? Mm-hmm. Right. So just having that's really important. So that's important to have and to know. The second thing is to then create a space in which an organization or individual can set that aside and not be hostage by it, so that the only future possible is more of what I've got, but mm-hmm. to free yourself to say, you know what, that is what it is. What's next is whatever I say. Mm-hmm. And so the key to the future dimension is courage. So the dimension of reality is all about knowledge. The dimension of future is all about courage. Mm-hmm. And that courage is my ability to speak to what I imagine could be, to be able to declare without any credential or knowledge of what I'm talking about, and be able to speak to it anyway. We do this all the time as human beings. We so desperately want to be about something bigger. We want to be up to something big. Mm-hmm. What we need to do is let go of all these business and societal constraints that have us squelch that ambition to speak to future and set it free. And
Right.
that's how you got to start by first understanding the reality that you're working from before you can express the future.
And then again, just and in some ways to speed up where this might be going, so people get clear about where they are, crystal clear, then they have the courage to set a much bigger future, one that's far removed, perhaps potentially anyway, from where they are, or at least it has that a bit possibility. And then presumably then it's about helping them put some planning together on how to get there. And then do you work with people to hold them accountable? Because I mean, I think the hardest part these are all hard parts. Actually, I acknowledge that for sure. But I always feel like the hardest part is getting people to stay on course, or to continue. Like it's easier, I think, for people to get excited initially about an idea, but then their old ways of thinking kind of fall back in. So I was curious how you kind of help companies stay on course. But it sounds like I might be jumping ahead. So.
Yeah, no, that's a great question. So let's go there in just a second. The third thing though is not just to articulate what kind of future you want, but to really get a sense of why. And the way that gets uncovered. I'll give you a couple of the favorite questions I ask. It's those moments when something happens and it reminds you of, wow, that's why I do this. It's those conversations you go home at night and that's the one you can't wait to tell your family about. Mm-hmm. You wouldn't believe what happened today. You wouldn't believe what I got to do. Or you wouldn't believe what I just witnessed. Mm-hmm. In those stories lies the answer to the question, why does this matter? Mm-hmm. And if you listen to those stories, if you listen to somebody else tell those stories, you can really hear it pretty clearly. They're up to something. There's something they've seen that their efforts are connected to that has them. And it's funny that one you feel in your heart when you're hearing those stories, you're feeling it in your heart. And
absolutely. Mm-hmm.
At the beginning of this conversation, we talked about the listening. That's the listening I'm talking about. What kind of, Matt, for you, like what kind of listening would I be able to provide you that you could speak to those stories? And then I could reflect back to you. Here's what I heard you're up to based on the stories you just shared with me. So that's really the third piece of this that has to come up. And here's the simplest way to put it. We take a lot of action in our lives, but if without context, right, without a relationship between context and action, mm-hmm. right, then the actions we take are going to cause consequences that we have no context or understanding of because we never used any context to decide what actions we're taking. What I'm after for myself and with the people I work with is, what is the context that's informing your actions? How are your actions informing you living up to the context, right? If my purpose is unclear and unarticulated, how can I possibly design my actions to be in service to my purpose? Mm-hmm. Right. And if I'm taking action without purpose, how can I possibly imagine my actions are going to cause anything greater than what they were, in service to at the time before. Might be a fire drill.
So is this the process that you went through with your colleagues 12 years ago to get them on board? You got them to experience this process with other companies?
Yeah.
Okay.
Not just experience it, but to design it together.
Okay. And then I've got to ask, so what do you see your purpose as? And did that come out 12 years ago, or has that become more clear over time since then?
Yeah. I'll describe it in two phrases. There's a belief and there's a commitment, and I'll explain to why. The commitment I was clear about when I met my mentor all those years ago. That came out very clear. And that commitment is a commitment to creating a world where we can be fully expressed as human beings in everything we do. We leave nothing at the door when we go to work. In fact, we live in a world that demands our full expression. Mm-hmm. We bring not only our history, but we bring our beliefs, we bring our imaginations, we bring our unique perspective and gifts to the world all the time. So that's my commitment. And that's my commitment to what am I spending my life on? Mm-hmm. And what am I spending the lives of others on is in that domain. My belief behind it, because a commitment without a belief, again, is an idea without any context. And a belief without a commitment is a nice idea without any action. It's a philosophy. My belief is that human beings have the infinite capacity to contribute to what they believe in. And I found that to be true over and over again. Human beings are not resources to use up. Human beings are infinite in their capacity to give and to contribute to and to provide for what they believe in. Mm-hmm. If we could just get our dang hands on what is it that I believe in, we can unleash that in human beings. And so why do our clients do so darn well, and why do the people I work with do so well, is because they have found voice and language to declare what they're up to, so that they're able to access their own infinite capacity to contribute.
And I'm just going to, I don't think I need to do this, but I will anyway, just in terms of those listening, to sort of retranslate it as far as the individual goes. It's that process, by the sounds of it, of, as you said, first it's that clarity about where exactly are you now, and having the courage, as you said, to create an environment that doesn't have to keep you hostage, but is one that where you can imagine something that much bigger. And then on the back of that bigger picture, why is that so important to you? So, I mean, this is something, as you indicated, well, I think before we talked today anyway, that this can apply just as much for an individual listening. And I do like you connecting commitment and belief. I think it's doesn't get a lot of airtime. And it reminds me, it's funny, I was asked to review somebody's book last week, and one of the keys in his book, which was a book on being a rainmaker, interestingly, but he said that the top rainmakers have to have a commitment to wanting to stick with it and get better at it, which I suppose then when I say it out loud sounds really obvious, but it was really a fundamental piece to what he was saying. In other words, his life experiences is that the vast majority of, he was speaking mostly about lawyers, but not exclusively, but most of the people he worked with in his 27 years clearly didn't have that commitment, because he felt that it was a very achievable thing to get good at. That's really all. But it's interesting then that the following week you're bringing it up as such a key part to what helps you, I guess, sustain your your passion for what you're doing. And then can you give us I just want to learn a bit more about you, and also because it was in your bio, the story about you losing weight. I mean, and also because you speak with such passion. I know your passion isn't just focused only on your professional work. How does it translate also in your personal life? Because you speak as if, like, interestingly, as you just said, this is who you are, period, like throughout your whole life. So how do you live some of this out in your personal life?
Now, one of the things that I think is interesting that I've learned over time is it's not so much what you say, it's where you're standing when you say it. Meaning, the closer you are to your truth when you are speaking or when you are listening, the more powerful the effect is you'll have. And in all of this work for me and the work I do with others, it's about getting closer to my truth. Mm-hmm. Whatever that truth is, whether that truth is your relationship to the divine, whether that truth is your commitment to the world, whether that truth is something that you're out for. The closer we get to that truth, the more powerful we can expect the outcomes of our actions to be, even if those actions aren't saying a thing. Even if it's just your presence. Yeah. Okay. If you were just present with your truth and you were in the room, it's amazing what it can allow for. The closer you get to your truth. So, when I took on my own personal fitness, for example, it was another one of those moments where I was getting to a point of a choice to say, well, I guess my life will be following the bell curve of unhealthy, middle-aged white male. and I was moving nicely along that trajectory, and being really unhappy about it, or, what am I going to do about it? And it was interesting. Sort of, I took on running as a practice, and it clicked. And actually through running, I discovered I had a heart condition, which actually doubled down my commitment to keep going. And so, I was 260 pounds on April of 2014. And by April of 2015, I completed the Boston Marathon in 3 hours and 30 minutes.
Holy cow. That's a fantastic story.
Which means and I never had a history of being an athlete of any kind before that. So if I can do that, who can't? And so I went on to mentor other runners who were just getting started. So that was a lesson in discipline. Holy cow. I know we want to talk a little bit about how do you get this stuff to stick, right? Great. So I have a sense of vision and future. I've got a sense of purpose. That's all well and good. but boy, I've got a busy day tomorrow.
Right.
And I don't have time to be thinking about this stuff all the time. So the whole running thing was just a wonderful lesson. And this is all a practice, and it's all a discipline. It's about, forming new habits and breaking other habits.
Mm-hmm.
And I find the most successful drug that you can buy that will allow you to be successful, either creating new habits or breaking old ones, is community.
Okay. That's interesting. I wasn't expecting you to say that. I thought you were going to say exercise. So talk about community then. What's your definition of that?
So for instance, you might have something that you're up to. Let's say you've got a cause that you believe in, right? There may be a lot of communities out there that are about that cause too, that you could go join. In other cases, you're going to be up to something that you're going to find that there's a community that doesn't yet exist, but if did, would allow you to take on what you want to take on. And it's kind of like looking at both those things and say, oh, okay, well, what do I have in my life right now that I want to get better at? Is there a community that exists around that? Running is a great one because there's active communities. And I'll tell you right now, if you've got somebody at 5:30 in the morning waiting outside for you because you promised them you're going to go running with them, you show up.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
In some cases, like one of the things that we started were these SIP sessions. There wasn't a community. And so we created one. And now we've got this thriving community of other change agents that are coming together every month after month, taking on really dangerous topics and pushing themselves to take more responsibility for what's going on in the world. And in that case, that was a community we created. But community is always the answer. My partner, she's in the mental health field, and by far and away, when it comes to healing from mental health challenges or being able to get beyond needing to be relying on services for folks suffering with addiction, recovery, or mental illness, community is by far and away the number one antidote.
That's really fascinating. I'm slightly embarrassed that it's not been so forefront of my own mind, even though on one level I'm saying that and I'm running mastermind groups where I'm fully aware of the beauty of community in a somewhat similar capacity, perhaps. But from a bigger picture scale, which is what you're talking about, I think I hadn't thought it through at all, really. And it's a bit counter almost to the culture that we live in, really, which is the sort of do it yourself, pull yourself up by your own bootstraps type of mindset, which is fascinating. But there's two pressing questions that I don't want to let fade from the relevancy of where we are right now in our conversation. The first one, and I don't know if I can bring it back or not. Oh, yeah, right. So you said, okay, it was 5 minutes ago now, but didn't want to interrupt the flow. You said the closer you are to the truth, to your truth, the more powerful you are. I'm paraphrasing, but that's what I could write down. And it sounded like what you were saying is the more amazing things happen in your life. And that's certainly becoming more and more my own experience. But I also thought of, though, I guess I want you to comment on it because it's, are you familiar with Gay Hendricks' book, The Big Leap?
Yeah. Yes.
Okay. So for the purpose of those listening, he makes a point towards the end that the main reason most people don't take a big leap in life is fear, not of failure so much, well, perhaps a failure, but of this notion that if I go all in on something and don't succeed, that it's going to be too painful to bear as I head towards my demise. And therefore people end up not wanting to take that risk because they feel that it will be too painful, which again, of course, is not what any of us aspire to, but it sounds like that's what most people do. And I've no reason to doubt it. It seems to be, I can't think of too many exceptions to that in my own life, other than people I've been interviewing more recently on the podcast. But it's obviously the opposite of what you said about the closer you are to the truth, the more powerful you are. Can you comment on that, or that fear that people have and sort of your antidotes to it?
Yeah. So it's funny, like we're in a society right now, particularly in the United States, where we're pretty able to deal with our weaknesses. If you just look at the cover of Cosmo magazine, there's 17 things wrong with you that here's how you can fix them. And we have this sort of what's wrong with the world or what's wrong with you sort of framing around everything. And so, I'm overweight, there's all these things we can pick out as problems. And that's fine. It's uncomfortable. We don't like it, but we can deal with it. What we can't always deal with, or the thing that scares us the most, is staring at our own reflection in the mirror and asking ourselves, are we really willing to own what we know in our bones we're capable of? Are we willing to own it? Because we know owning it means I got to give up on all the bullshit in my life that I'm using as excuses because it makes me comfortable, or it, whatever it is, it has me be less of who I know I can be. One of the practices I do with folks, when in coming to understand these bigger ideas about what they're here for, is to remind them of this idea, which is, if not you taking a stand for this, are you going to be satisfied waiting for somebody else to deal with it? Mm-hmm. Are you okay abdicating responsibility for this commitment to somebody else? Because if you are, then you can't complain when you're not happy with how it turns out. The other is this idea that if you think about the trajectory of the human species and all that came before it, or whatever it is you believe was what caused it, you could look at it and say, all of that, every human spirit, every ounce of energy is wishing for you to do this, because if you do, you are advancing human potential. You are playing a critical role of us achieving our birthright as a species.
Okay, I've got to stop you for a second. I'm sorry, because these are two massive things, and I certainly plan to sort of put these more forefront of my mind. And the only thing that holds me, that slows me down with this is these, again, and forgive me because I've got to shoot from the hip. I mean, these are great rational arguments. How do you help people kind of get that more into the subconscious, into the piece that's going to get more people to take action? Because I could see this working, short term to get someone, but I'm not saying, you can't get much more compelling than what you just said, but I'm simply saying that, how do you get that to sink in more? It's kind of like where I was going with even with the business work that you do. Even I've had this experience. I really feel like I've hit the nail on the head after many years in terms of getting clarity about sense of purpose. And yet it still isn't always sort of like right in front of me. I mean, as you said, it's still way too easy to just get busy and get sucked into everything, which I really bothers me immensely. So I'm just curious for how you've managed to ingrain it more. I mean, you've obviously had to make some shifts in how you are, who you are as a person, and how you run, and not run literally, but also that piece too. But how do you help people, let's start with individuals, to take more consistent action after the initial epiphany or clarity?
Well, Matt, I'm thinking about our conversation even on Friday, and you're up to something. Like this podcast isn't for your entertainment. You're exploring something. There's another chapter coming that you are taking on a new frontier. And so I would use this, the example that you have this podcast is because you've created conditions that invite a particular kind of conversation, that you're starting to form a picture and language about this thing you're up to in your next chapter. Because you've had a sort of extraordinary set of experiences and have done some amazing things, but you're not done. There's something else coming. So I just want to connect the dots that you're up to something, and I love it because of where you're even listening from in this podcast. So I can appreciate that. In the simplest form, it starts like this. Let's just say someone comes to some language to describe their greater purpose. It starts by making it so you can't ignore that phrase on any given day. So I'll tell people, take a screenshot of it and put it on the background of your phone. Write it down 10 times on small Post-it notes and hide them in your house. Have them in places that will surprise you, under the side of your visor, or, a place where, so that's where it starts. Is if we want to presence our purpose, we simply need to make our purpose present in our lives first, because the more it's present, the more it starts to change the wiring in our brains. The second thing is, what are the 5 things that are going to happen tomorrow no matter what, right? You're going to take a shower. You're going to eat. You're going to schedule a meeting, whatever it might be. What are the 5 things you're bulletproof for? Okay. How do we insert this purpose into the design of those 5 things you're going to do? Now start a journal. and log what's happening and changing just because you're starting to insert these things. If you are thinking through your idea of purpose as you're taking a shower, I guarantee your day is going to be a different kind of day.
Yeah.
Right. So how do we create those kinds of habits?
Love it.
The next thing would be pick 3 people that are critical in your life and take them to lunch and share this with them. What you're up to, your vulnerability around it, your fear, just to have the experience of being heard. Here's why, and this is where it gets really interesting. I believe in this, and I've had a lot of experience around this thing that happens. Imagine that the key that's going to unlock your future is lying inside of somebody else. But the only way to get to it is to get them talking about their purpose and their vision for future. Imagine you're the key for them. And the only way they can discover that is if you share yours. And I will tell you, it's true. If you give yourself permission to share yourself at that level with another, it grants them permission to share that level of themselves with you. And we are desperate for it as human beings, and we never give each other permission to speak from that place. And I'll tell you, if you can just open the door a little bit, you're going to invite somebody into your world that may be critical to your future, and you wouldn't have ever known it if all you did was talk about the weather and, how's your day? And we use all the smokescreen conversations. Oh, I'm so busy and and all this stuff. And we never talk about what actually matters. This gives you a way to talk about what matters. So how do I make it so I don't avoid it? How do I insert this idea into the design of the habitual actions I'm going to take every single day anyway? How do I insert this into my relationships with other human beings that matter to me? If you can do those 3 things over the course of a month, the rest will take care of itself.
Yeah, no, that makes sense. I love it. Absolutely love this. And it's funny because I don't even want to admit this, but I'll use the word squirm, but I still get slightly uncomfortable asking people what their purpose is in environments like this. And sometimes I don't, even though I want to, partly because I don't want to put someone on the spot if they haven't thought it through, because I feel like that might be a bit embarrassing. But the other thing I've found, which in a way doesn't align entirely with what you said, not that I'm disagreeing with it, but more just I get the feeling that most people haven't thought it through too much. And so often people's responses are relatively, they just haven't thought it through that much. Because I don't want to say they're superficial, because that's not true. But the common responses are things like, well, I want to provide for my family and I want a meaningful life. And those things, of course, are somewhat accurate and great. But I don't think they go deep enough for most people. I think most people really have to dig a lot deeper to really get underneath. And then often, again, in my somewhat limited experience, although not that limited experience of the topic, it seems to often relate to some core gap or experience usually from childhood that's not conscious, that's driving them, that actually prompted them to go into the line of work they did most often, but they haven't always been able to quite connect those dots. I mean, often, or it's something related to a parent, to try, or certainly a key relationship. And it's funny because earlier when you asked about, when you asked people about momentous things that happened while they were working that helped them connect those dots, that's what happened to me. In June, I spoke to a group for a couple of hours, and I gave an example about someone I'd interviewed on my podcast that right at the end kind of said that, well, most of my professional success I've sort of done because of my mother and this horrible life she had, and she died young, and his dad had died even younger. I was an alcoholic, and her son had died, and all these horrible things. And he sort of said, I've really just tried to make her look good or feel good because she had such a tough life. And I shared this example to the group. And afterwards, this guy came up to me and he had tears in his eyes because he had this unbelievable story about how his brother had been murdered when he was 15, and the police had blamed him. He was 15, his brother was 14, but he'd been, charged initially. And I mean, just crazy story. And then he'd been in jail, not related to that. But then gone on to become this multimillionaire entrepreneur. And he said the same thing. He said, I absolutely said that not a day goes by when I don't toast my success to my brother. I mean, stuff like that. But the fact he was crying about it was this, he hadn't connected all those dots. So I hear what you're saying. I'm just curious if I'm mistaken. In other words, that you actually find, on the contrary, many people have thought it through. Because if they haven't, again, what tips do you have for people to get that ball rolling, since it's so unbelievably jugular based on the context of what we're discussing today?
Yeah, Matt, that's awesome. And that's exactly why the paradox exists. We're afraid to talk about it, so we don't.
Mm-hmm.
And so we don't have the experience of being able to speak to it. And when we don't have the experience of being able to use part of our soul, our brain, our body, what does it do? It atrophies. So what we've got is we've got a world where we're afraid to talk about what matters. And in doing so, we have created a national atrophy around our ability to speak to our imaginations and our consciousness.
Mm-hmm.
So what do we do about that, right? Your fear is rightly founded. So remember, I said future you can't create directly. You can only create it by inviting conditions that favor the future that you want. I can't say I want $10,000 to show up tomorrow in a suitcase. I need to create conditions that favor that happening. You can't normally, unless someone's like fully like taken on a purpose journey, it's really hard to ask someone directly, what's your purpose?
Yeah.
So you got to sneak around it, come at it indirectly. And the way you come around it indirectly is you get them talking about the stuff that really matters. I've got 3 questions I tend to use that work really well, and I'll give them to you. One of them is, what is it that those that know you and love you can count on you for, no matter what? That's one.
Mm-hmm.
Another is, what is it that makes you sad about the world? Another is what are you reliable for giving or contributing? What is it that you are consistently out there doing or delivering? What is it that people can count on you for? Those 3 questions really start to get at the territory of what's going on with someone, and even come at it like I did with you, to say, hey, when was the last time something happened for you that reminded you of why you do what you do? That's an awesome cocktail party conversation. That, man, what a gift, because who doesn't want to speak to something like that? Mm-hmm. And if you listen to where, if you listen from the standpoint of, how do I locate where this person's standing when they speak from that place? What is it that they're up to? And you can reflect back what you heard them say. Here's what I heard you speak. That's giving someone the experience of being seen and recognized for what they stand for, not just what job they have and how busy their life is. And if you can give that gift to someone, I'll tell you what, it is the best gift in the world.
And then my brain comes back to the word presence, which you haven't used, I don't think, but I feel like you talk about it in a different way. Like I said, helping people feel heard. I mean, that's the only way people can feel heard, is if they feel like you're completely tuned in. And then it reminds me of the speed of our lives, where you talk about just how busy things can easily be. That it seems like what we need to come up with together are some more solutions for ways for people to slow down enough to actually do the things that matter the most. That's actually, I didn't realize quite how important that is. That's pretty jugular, that and we're only getting faster, and with the pace of things too. So anyway, I'm just thinking out loud. But
here's a thing that we, and it's not easy. The world's going to throw stuff at you, and it's going to get really good at getting you to react. Like, things are going to hit us emotionally. They're going to hit us in all these ways, which is why we tend not to be able to have the time to be thoughtful, or to be more considerate of, well, where am I when I'm listening to this person? We're right there, ready to fire and ready to react. Is stay curious. So I'm witnessing Matt showing up to me on this podcast a certain way. I wonder what that's about. I wonder what life's like for him. I wonder what it is that has him ask these questions. Even if, so I'm in the human development space, right? Oftentimes I'm in the business of making people uncomfortable, and oftentimes their uncomfortableness will be attacks at me. And so instead of defending the attack, so tell me about what's coming up for you that has you react the way you're reacting right now. Obviously this touched off something you're sensitive to. Speak to that. What's that about, right? You start to uncover. If you can just stay curious about, what am I seeing right now in the behavior that's showing up in front of me, it disarms not only your want to react, to give advice or to, jump on a solution or to sympathize, but simply ask another question. Tell me what that's about. And what you can do if you just remain curious is you can give the other the experience of them sorting it out for themselves just by simply you asking questions. And
presumably not getting emotionally involved by the sounds of it, right?
Totally.
Which is also quite hard. So this is wonderful. And it's so funny because the last person I interviewed, which is also on Friday, just 3 days ago, she talked about curiosity as well. And for me, that was something that, even though I read that Gay Hendricks book last year about 4 times, and he talked about the importance of curiosity, I simply couldn't. It was almost like it was something I couldn't get into my system. It was almost like he said, well, start eating jalapeno peppers. I'm thinking, well, that's not going to happen, because that's how I responded to that advice about just be more curious. That's too hard. I don't know how to do that anymore. It's too hard. So it's funny that now 2 people have mentioned it in such a short time span. And again, it's the same thing. The next question for me is, okay, so how do I somehow weave this into something I do more often? Because otherwise, hearing it today helps reinforce, but it won't be enough. And I do have a habit tracker that I'm using, which is a good place for me to put some things. That's one question I still have on this one. I mean, for people that are very rusty with that approach to sort of problems and challenges, any suggestions there on becoming a more curious person?
Yeah, I'm thinking about like this podcast, right? The more powerful the why it exists, like what are you up to that has this work be so important, the more I'm able to contribute to you. And so, the inquiry for yourself might be, so I'm doing this thing. What does it allow for? Of all the things it allows for, which of them matter most to me and why? So imagine doing that inquiry. Maybe this weekend or tonight you do a quick meditation. Say, I'm doing this podcast. What are all the things it allows for? I think we've done like 20 of them I saw maybe. What does it allow for? And maybe even ask others that have been part of it or who have listened to it. What is it opening up for you? If you can capture all of those things and then reflect on those and say, wow, there's a couple in here that really get my socks to go up and down, you're on the territory of something. And be like, okay, you know what I mean? Like,
the question that doesn't quite work for me, that what does it allow? Because the language is a bit too foreign for me. I did go through my podcasts in terms of lessons learned, and that was really helpful. And that was a staggeringly long list, I have to say, of things which was great, that I identified. Is that what you're talking about in terms of what am I learning?
That's what it's accomplished. That's fine, right?
Okay.
So what has having this podcast accomplished is fine. Look at those accomplishments and ask yourself, what do they allow for? What might they invite? So what that happened? What's it good for? What could it cause if put into application another way?
Oh, well, that's massive. I mean, the biggest thing for me in that regard is the realization that when I personally talk to a real human being versus read about someone else in someone else's book, it comes to life much more. And I just start to realize that I'm talking to flesh and blood like myself, and that this person can accomplish remarkable things, then it's a lot easier for me to understand the concept that I can too. So it's pretty profound for me in that regard. So I'm going to play this out. Yeah.
Just indulge me for a second. When we spoke, you had mentioned that what you're really curious about is, how do we get these things to stick? There's no lack of really great ideas out there. There's no lack of great habits or things that would help people accomplish more, breakthrough. But the failure rate's abysmal. Like, we give up on these things. And maybe this podcast is because you see that getting beyond the words in a book, getting into the dialogue, because it's what's between what's being said that only comes up through conversation, that often gives us a foothold here. That this is another channel in which to see if this exists. Does this give more staying power to some of these ideas so that more people could make them habit forming over time and have them stick instead of having it fall away and just be another thing they tried? So that's where, based on everything you told me, that's why I'm like, was excited to be here and what I think you're up to.
Mm-hmm. Oh yeah, no, and combining it with, okay, right. So then that's one reason that I started mastermind groups as well, so that there is a group of people, community, and the accountability, and then the discovery process, but also the opportunity to have something stick for a longer period of time. And let's say a weekend seminar or something along those lines. So that's definitely a piece of it. And then I'm combining it with various other things, like learning more about how to influence our subconscious mind into helping us take quicker action, but also very, very practical things like James Clear's Atomic Habits and the 1% piece, that perhaps that is the solution, that if you just can, obviously you've got to have enough fuel and purpose to keep persevering with those 1%, as I'm sure you must have with your marathon successes, that if you just keep doing those things, and perhaps how can people do it in different ways? Like the running piece, well, that's great and all, but like I have no cartilage in my knee and I've had back problems. So it's unlikely I'm going to be running. So therefore, how do you kind of create alternative versions of that community for people in different situations or with different goals, so that they can stick at something long enough to get the breakthroughs, and then also brace for needing to break through those self-imposed, culturally imposed ceilings that can still stop people, even if they do have seemingly good habits, where they just still find other ways to sabotage because of all this. So anyway, yes, it's absolutely work in progress, and we could talk about it for hours, I'm guessing.
Yeah.
It's funny. I can see we've really started warming up big time in the last 40 minutes or so. But I know we should wrap up, at least for this time anyway. So my favorite wrap-up question is, based on where you were 12 years ago, who have you become since that day?
Wow. I guess in a nutshell, I have come to a place where I realize that what I'm up to is bigger than me. There are other forces at work that I have opened the door to. And I'm much more at peace that I'm not alone in this. And the passion I speak from is because I'm speaking from my own truth in this.
Yeah.
This is beyond my job. This is beyond my vocation. I describe a particular segment of practitioner out there, which I call elite practitioners. These are practitioners that don't do this work because it's a vocation. They do it. It's because it's who they be. Mm-hmm. And that's who I seek to reveal in the work I do, is who else is out there that operates at that level. Let's conspire together and do something great.
I love it. And how can people learn more about you and keep in touch?
Sure. The best channels are email, which is brentr@fathom.net, okay. And or text or cell 860-463-4661. Okay. Can you give us so the web address is fathom.net. Fathom.net. Okay, fathom.net. And then the SIP sessions, well, we don't have time to get into those, but people can read about those on Fathom as well? Yes, they're our community event open to the public. We host them once a month, and there's a whole list of them on the website, right on the SIP session tab. And the location for those? What they're all over the place. They do? They're different every time, yeah. Okay, but in the Northeast? Yeah. In the Northeast, yep. Yeah. Okay. And then are you on any other websites or, social medias or anything like that? Play or blog sites? Yeah, LinkedIn would be a good place. The best place to go to. Great. Brilliant. Yep. Okay. Well, Brent, this has been absolutely fascinating. And I wish we could carry on for another hour actually, but that's probably a bit too much. We'll just have to kind of come at it from a different angle next time and start with perhaps a specific topic, which I don't normally do, but I think maybe that would be helpful because then we could really go deep. Anyway, but thank you so much. Well, Matt, what might be interesting, Matt, just quickly, like what if there were one of your listeners who actually was up to something and wanted to play it out live? Yeah. That would be really interesting. So anyway, just something that would be really fun. I mean, you mean kind of go through your process, you mean? No, that they'd be on the air with us recording, talking about something they're up to. Okay. They're in formation of their next chapter. Why not have that be a conversation you could invite one of your listeners to come join us? Well, somebody immediately jumps to mind, but I'm sure there's many of them in it. I give it a second's thought. But perhaps we can perhaps talk about that offline. So anyway, thank you again, Brett. This has been amazing.
listeners, show notes are going to be on the website at matt-anderson.com, matt-anderson.com. Otherwise, I'm going to wrap up as usual with my favorite question, which is, what would you do if you knew you couldn't fail? Very appropriate for today. I'm Matt Anderson, and this was The Road Not Taken.